Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Diego Mello with StratiVentures, and today we have a very special guest, Alex Massa of Appraisal MC. They're a management and compliance company, and they also do work, or he owns another company called Initech Appraisals, which is the actual appraisal division of their real estate platform. I've known Alex for years. We've been able to work, not as much as I would have wanted to work with him, but we have been following him and his growth. And so that's why we're super excited to have Alex today on this special topic on validating or also valuing, appraisals for listings. So a little bit about today's webinar. We're started right now, and we'll get into the topic information roughly at around 6:35. And then we'll go into the speakers portion, and then around 7:10 or even later, if that's okay, we'll go into a Q&A. Excuse me, Alex, one moment. Sorry about that, Alex. I'll speak all day and have classes, so sometimes it tends to beat me there.
Totally fine.
Wow, one moment. Okay. So here, a little bit about StratiVentures so you can get to know who we are. I'm sorry, before that is if you're a Zoom participant, then at that point, you want to go ahead and make sure that your questions are put in the Q&A section of the platform. I don't believe we're having any polls. And if you have a question for the moderator outside of the topic, feel free to put that in the chat box. And let me remind everybody, put your questions in the Q&A because that's exactly where we want to pull the questions from. If you feel like the information and everything is not going to your liking, feel free to hit the leave webinar, the end button, and then we'll move on to the next. Excuse me. We do encourage questions because this event is for you. So we highly want to encourage that you guys have questions because a lot of our speakers really do thrive when it comes to the knowledge and the Q&A. This is the core team for SVI that encompasses all of the, I'd say, sectors or sections of a real estate transaction, in which all of our members do have the ability to talk to these advisors. They're all investors themselves, and then they all encompass a solid role in the real estate world in which we bring that value to our members. A little bit about myself, guys, for those of you that don't know me. I was born in Colombia at the age of 4, came to the United States. I live in Houston with my wife, Kate, and my son, Aiden. I was a prior mortgage broker and asset manager, and I started investing in real estate in May of 2012. And fast forwarding on now to around 2020, now 2022, we have over 2,100 members and we're in 27 states and continually growing. So that's why we like to make sure that our message goes out nationally about this wacky world of real estate investing. And Alex, you coming from the appraisal world, you know it's a wacky world.
Oh yeah, I see it every day.
Every day. What is StratiVentures is we are a full service real estate investing company. We handle the abilities of acquisition analysis, real estate services, project management and contracting, and even funding. So for those of you that are wanting to find out how you can get a hold of that real estate transaction, have it vetted out, have it fully reviewed, and make sure that it's a low risk investment, give us a call. We'd love to work with you, and we have a lot of free one-on-ones that we can help understand this process better with you. I tell people, Alex, this question: what does a real estate investor do? And I'm going to get 5, 10, 20, 30 different variances of the definition. And to me, that's risk. When you have too many people in the same world under the same activity, and everybody kind of understands it in a different way, it's the same way as appraisals, right? Value is determined by data, it's determined not by opinion, it's determined by hardcore numbers. And that's what real estate investing is. So we like to tell everybody that an investor analyzes, acts, invests, and makes profit with one word in mind, and that's risk. So at SVI, what do? We 100% develop risk managers. And those risk managers are the ones that actually go out there and make decisions. So a little bit about our special guest speaker, Alex. You're a graduate from the University of Houston in the Business School under their entrepreneurial program. You've worked in the appraisal industry since 1998, so you've seen it. I mean, you've seen the ups and downs and the
Every
glory and the whole
cycle.
thing.
Yeah. I've seen every cycle, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you're well versed because you said cycle. The
Yeah.
amount of people that don't understand that real estate is in a cycle process, also risk and different economical influences will happen. You have to be very, very versed at what you do. You founded one of the largest appraisal firms in the country, and that before joining Appraisal MC, and that was what, Initech Appraisals, your
Yes, we
company?
still run it. Yep.
Absolutely. And Chief Executive Officer for Appraisal MC, and also you're the division president of the valuations department and ensures the Appraisal MC maintains an efficient process. Do you know how important that is to everybody that's listening, the efficient process of appraisals? Is because the number one thing we've heard from everybody is our appraisals are backed up. Our appraisals are backed up. What is
Right.
going on? And I strongly believe is that that's a lack of confidence in the knowledge, because an appraiser should know what they're looking at, right? They should be obviously not shooting from the hip, but they need to have that enough knowledge to know that they're confident about what they're giving out in values. And you also oversee the investor requirements as well as federal regulations, because this is a big important item, right? In real estate.
Yeah.
So with that, Alex, I want to go ahead and give the ball over to you. So I'm going to stop the share if you want to go ahead and share. And then
Yes.
we
Yeah,
can
I'd love
go
to
ahead
do
and
that.
get you.
Thanks for the intro. And just to clarify a little bit more, I did start as an appraiser while I was in college in 1998, and I was in the field for many, many years. My sister and I first founded Initech Appraisals, which was residential appraisers, boots on the ground. And in the ashes of 2008, which was the worst cycle we'll hopefully ever see, we created Appraisal MC. So one thing that happened prior to 2008, mortgage brokers could call appraisers directly and basically try and influence the appraiser's opinion and say, I need a value and you need to make it or I'm not sending you any more work. Well, that was part of the problem that caused the financial crisis. So they came out with new rules to have a third party middleman that was basically the firewall between the lender and the appraiser. And that's when we created Appraisal MC. Appraisal MC is now in 33 states. And that's all we do is the procurement and compliance of the appraisal process. And in the meantime, we continue to grow Initech. So Initech is one of the largest appraisal firms in Texas. We've got 30 appraisers that cover Houston, Austin, San Antonio. So I run both divisions now. As of April 2020, my sister stepped down to work on another real estate project. And so I see quite a bit, and I'm anxious to share this with you. On the side, with all this knowledge, I've invested myself. I've invested in commercial real estate. I've developed, I've built specs, or at least been the financier in building specs, and analyzed properties myself. And the way you analyze properties throughout the whole system is the same way. And I've got a great presentation here that I'm going to share with you. And I'll tell you a little bit about this presentation and how this came about. I was doing an Appraisal 101 class for a group of realtors, and a realtor came up to me and said, look, I know you're not a licensed realtor, but I'd love for you to put yourself in our shoes and pretend like you're pricing a listing. How would you price a house if you're a realtor? And I thought, what a great idea to put myself in a realtor's shoes and basically in an investor's shoes, like trying to figure out what a property's worth and what are things that you would look at, market conditions, comps, there's so many aspects of it. And this is how this presentation was born. And I love this quote here by Zam Monroe. And it says, price in real estate is mostly a matter of supply and demand, just like in every other industry. And telling sellers the price they want to hear may get you the listing, but it won't sell the house. And this is so true, because what's going to sell the house is the house itself and priced correctly. In this market, it's a little bit different. In this market, there's a little bit of buzz in the demand aspect of it too. But it's really important to understand that the value of homes is based on what buyers are willing to pay. So with that being said, let me move on to this slide here. And this is important as an investor to know. What items and what things would you ask yourself first before pricing a property? And I think that the first thing that you need to know is what's the motivation for sellers and buyers in the market, right? Are sellers moving to a certain area because there's tax advantages? That's what's happening in Texas and Florida. We're having a huge influx of people coming into these markets. Are people moving out of states for a certain reason? Are they moving out of states like California or New York because of tax burdens or other reasons? Are jobs moving? So it's really important to know what the motivation and the markets are. The next thing to understand is, are you in a buyer's or a seller's market? And for the last 2 years, in just about every market in the US, we all know what market we were in, right? We were in the seller's market. And in many markets, we are still in the seller's market. But in some markets, it's changing. So with that change, you need to calculate and measure what Diego mentioned earlier, and that is the component of risk, right? The next thing that you look at when pricing properties is what similar homes have sold for in the neighborhood. It's so important. We'll talk more about the comparable selection process here shortly. And also another thing to look at is what's active and pending in the market. What are you competing against in the market? Are there other homes of similar quality, condition, different locations in a particular neighborhood? You need to analyze those properties as well. And the next thing to look at is your current inventory and what does the supply and demand look like? And appraisers have a really interesting formula to determine if a market is undersupplied, oversupplied, or in balance. And that's this next slide right here, which I'm going to share with you. And it's called the absorption rate. And I'll give you an example of what the absorption rate is and what it does. So let's say in a particular subdivision, let's say the name of the subdivision is River Oaks. In River Oaks, let's hypothetically say that in the past 12 months, there were 120 homes sold. So if I divide 120 by 12, that gives me 10. What is that telling me as an appraiser? That's giving me information that this market is able to absorb 10 homes per month. And the way to calculate the absorption rate and the supply and demand, what you do is you divide the total number of listings by your sales per month. So for example, if you've got 80 active listings, active properties for sale in that market, and you have 10 sales per month, if you divide 80 by 10, you get an 8-month supply. Now, by definition, anything over a 6-month supply is considered oversupplied. That means that it's going to take over 6 months in order to absorb all those properties. Those are markets that you want to avoid buying in at the time. You want to have areas that are still in high demand. So really what you're looking for is less than 6 months. And really in this market with such little inventory, it's probably less than 3 months. But it's really important to run this absorption rate in any market to determine what the supply and demand is. Are people leaving this market? Are people coming into this market? What is the demand? If people are leaving this market and the supply is beginning to increase and you're looking for property to flip, this might not be your best option. This might be an option where you're going to be holding a property for a very long time, and it looks like there's something wrong in the market in that particular subdivision, perhaps, that is causing this balloon supply of homes. So it's a really interesting formula that we use as appraisers every day on every appraisal to determine the supply and demand. And I think you as an investor can start using this just to analyze the risk in how much activity is going on in this market. The next slide, I skipped one slide, it's really irrelevant. This slide is really relevant because the question I get asked the most is, hey, appraiser, how in the world do you come up with your adjustments? Like, what is a bathroom worth? What is a bedroom worth? What is a 2-car garage worth or a pool worth? Well, the answer is it depends. And it depends on the particular market that you're in and what has sold in the market recently to support whatever adjustments I'm making. So what you need to do is look at a specific subdivision, and all your market data is going to be pulled from that specific market subdivision. In this case, for example, we have home A, which was a 1,500 square foot house with a 2-car garage, and it sold for 210. Home B is in the same subdivision, same size house, same finishes as home A. It did not have a garage and sold for 200. So this theory of paired sales analysis, what it does is it compares two homes in the same subdivision that are very similar, where one might have a different feature. And what we're looking for is what's the difference in sales price to determine what that feature is worth. And this example is very, very simple. In this market in particular, a 2-car garage is worth $10,000 because home A sold for $10,000 more than home B, and everything is identical besides the garage. What's really important to understand is this is in the suburbs of Houston or San Antonio, Dallas, I wouldn't say Austin. A 2-car garage is usually worth about $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000. Now, if anyone asks a builder right now, how much does it cost to build a detached 2-car garage? Well, I'll tell you, because I'm doing it right now at my own residence. We're converting our old garage into a game room and building a new one. And the new garage costs about 40 grand. So why isn't the garage worth 40,000? And this is what's so important to understand when you're an investor and when you work in real estate is we don't analyze what something costs when it comes to value. We analyze what someone's willing to pay. And that's the information that we're trying to extract in the market. What are people willing to pay for this house, for this feature in this neighborhood at this time? And this will vary and it'll change over the market or over the course of the year, or over the course of several years. When the pandemic hit in my neighborhood, for example, a pool adjustment may have been 10 or 15,000, and now it's probably 30,000. The demand for pools in our markets has increased since the pandemic. So that could change back down, or it might even go back up. But this is what's beautiful about real estate. It's kind of like the stock market. It's not static. It's constantly changing. And when there's change and volatility, there's opportunity. So do you want to discuss that? One mistake. So I'll tell you a little bit of some of the heartburn that I've seen investors deal with. And we do a lot of appraisal work for hard money lenders and banks that are lending to investors. And one mistake that we constantly see is that the investors are not verifying the square footage, and they're relying on tax records or MLS listings to tell them how big the house is. And many, many times that information is incorrect. And many times the house is actually smaller than what's listed in tax records, and it's smaller than what's listed in MLS. So you cannot rely on the tax records. So one thing you may want to ask a seller is, do they have any prior appraisal reports where the appraiser measured it to support the square footage? Do they have prior builder plans? If you have access to MLS in the market area, look at the prior MLSs for that particular property. Anytime it's ever sold, listed, withdrawn, or terminated, and see what square footage was listed. And the last option you have is hire an appraiser to measure it. You will get a appraiser to do the measurement when you complete the full appraisal, but at that point, you're so vested and deep into it, you're a week from closing and you just now find out that your property is not 2,000 square feet, it's 1,500 square feet, and that completely changes your deal. So knowing the square footage is one of the key factors in understanding the value of a home. The next thing we're going to look at, there's another mistake that I've seen, and it's the fault of this channel that we watch and probably got us interested in real estate, HGTV. And HGTV makes it seem so easy. You know, you put a couple $100,000 into a house and all of a sudden it's worth 400 grand more. Well, it's not the case. And so often they quote a price per square foot method that's average for the neighborhood and then multiply that by the house and voila, that's your value. And it doesn't work that way. So this was an example I had maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I was in the field. And I'll tell you about this. It was 2 homes across the street from each other. They were older homes, but they were built by the same builder. This was interesting. If you look at sale 1, it was an 1,800 square foot home. If you look at sale 2, it was a 2,100 square foot home. But if you looked at the footprint, they were basically the same floor plan. It's the only difference was on sale 2, they had bumped out the living room, dining room, and main bedroom to make it a little bit bigger. So basically the same floor plan, both 3-bedroom, 2 baths, both built by the same builder. And if you look at sale number 1, it sold for 200,000, which comes out to 111 a foot. And if you look at sale number 2, it sold for 215,000. It comes out to 102 a foot. So I want that to sink in. This is the same neighborhood. These homes sold about the same time. They're the same floor plan. And the bigger one sells for less per square foot than the smaller one. And why is that? Why is Costco and Sam's Club in business? Because they're able to sell in bulk for cheaper. And it works in real estate the same way. If you talk to builders, the bigger it is, the cheaper it is to build, and those savings are passed on to the consumer. And that's why in scenarios like this, you'll see the bigger homes sell for less than the smaller homes. So when analyzing comparable data, price per square foot is not the best measurement or the best tool unless you're comparing homes that are very, very, very similar. In cases where you can find very, very similar comps, your price per square foot method might work a little bit better. What's interesting about this, and as you get deeper into investing in properties, you'll start noticing that you become better at analyzing numbers and understanding what's going on in the market based on numbers. So that's what appraisers do all day. We're analyzing based on numbers, and there's an art to it. But in this particular case, this is where appraisers geek out because they can gather so much information. In this market, what I'm seeing is a difference of 300 square feet in this market will get you an extra 15,000. So then we can start figuring out what people are willing to pay for that additional square footage. In this case, 15,000 divided by 300 square feet comes out to $50 a foot. So basically the bigger the house is, you can basically add $50 a foot to the additional square footage. And that's what the market's willing to take on. I want to talk to you next before, there's 2 more things I want to talk to you. One is comparable selection and what is a comparable. And 2, we're going to talk about location and why that's so important. I don't have a slide on the comparable search, but every market's going to be a little bit different. Certification number 7 in the appraisal report is the best certification I've ever heard and the best explanation of what a comp is, because it says that the appraiser is supposed to utilize the sales that are locationally and physically the most similar to the subject property. So what's a comparable? Comparable is something that's very similar, right? If I ask you, am I comparable to Brad Pitt? Probably not. Maybe Ben Affleck, maybe a little bit closer. So everyone knows what a comparable is, right? Comparable is something that's very, very similar. So how do you narrow down what's similar locationally and physically? First and foremost, I think you need to look at your subdivision and your neighborhood, and you need to understand the nuances of that neighborhood. There might be locations within the neighborhood that are higher price point than others. And if you're an investor, it's your duty to really analyze that. So location, number 1, is key. What I do in my appraisal practice, or when I was out actually physically doing appraisals is I would look at my subdivision first. And the next thing that I would do is I would look at the homes that were the most similar in square footage, because a prospective buyer is looking at a certain maybe price point, but more importantly, a certain square footage range or bedroom range or bath range. But the best way to start is looking at the square footage. So typically what I do is I start in the subdivision and I would look at homes that are within 20% of the subject square footage. So if I'm 2,000 square feet, I'm looking at homes that are roughly 1,500 square feet to 2,500 square feet. So those are my first parameters. And then I'm going to hit search and it's going to populate maybe 20 properties. And of those 20 properties, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sift through each one. And we're looking at sales here. I'm going to sift through each one to see which 3 or 4 homes are the most similar. Once I determine that based on condition, quality, age, in some markets, lot size is very important. In some markets, not so much. So you need to understand lot values in the area. But once I narrow it down to those 3 or 4, then I've got a better grasp of where my value is. And then I can start making little adjustments or figuring out little adjustments for the differences in amenities or features that a property may have, by using that same method that we used earlier, the paired sales analysis. And the way we extracted the value for garage is how we can extract the value for anything when it comes related to comparing properties. You can figure out if you're on a busy street, how does that affect the market? We'll find a house that's on a busy street and then find one that's very similar that's not on a busy street and figure out what the percentage difference is or the price point difference is. So you can use that theory, paired sales analysis, to determine the adjustments for any single type of difference a property may have. So we're going to run just a quick analysis. I'm going to run through this pretty quick. I'll hit on gross rent multiplier, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. I know I'm moving quick, but there's just so much information I want to give you. So I live in a neighborhood in Houston called Briar Grove Park. And what I did a couple of years ago, I ran an analysis. I basically sat down trying to figure out what is a property worth, property that I'm prospectively going to list or prospectively going to buy, it doesn't matter. The first thing that I do is I figure out what the absorption rate is, right? So I figure out how many sales have sold in my neighborhood in the past 12 months. And that came up to 84. And how many active listings are there? There are 40. So if I divide 84 by 12, I get 7 sales per month. If I divide 40 by 7, I've got about a 5-month supply of homes. Now, this was, I think, pre-pandemic that I ran this analysis, but I've got a decent supply in the market, a 5-month supply of homes in my subdivision. So nothing to be scared of and nothing to write home about either. The next thing I do when I'm analyzing a property is I'm going to map where all the sales are. And that's what this map is here. And what's really peculiar about this, let's say I've never ever appraised in this market area, or I've never bought an investment property in this market area. When you map it, even though it's in the same subdivision, you start seeing the nuances of the market. And in this particular market, there's a street that divides the subdivision right down the middle called Briar Forest. And if you start analyzing the market a little bit better, you'll notice that the homes that are north of Briar Forest sell at a higher price point than the ones south of Briar Forest. And this is where location becomes so important, even within the same subdivision. And analyzing sales within the same subdivision closest to you is going to get you the best results and the closest value to what the actual value is. So that's what I looked at. And in this particular case, we're going to be analyzing a home that's north of Briar Forest just quickly. And that's this property right here. This was a property that went on the market for about $680,000 a few years ago. It was a 2,561 square foot home on a 9,300 square foot lot. Okay. And when I mapped it, it was north of Briar Forest. I want to show you just a couple pictures of what the inside looks like. It's got a few updates, ranch style house, We know how big it is. We know the lot size. Okay, good. So I ran through that whole analysis of, I pulled up all the sales that are within 20% square footage of the subject property, and then I mapped them. And then from there, I noticed that I had some south of Briar Forest, some north of Briar Forest. The ones south of Briar Forest were no bueno because they were at a lower price point, and we're north of Briar Forest. So I know that I'm in the higher price point section of the neighborhood. The next thing I did, I got a list of 14 sales that fit the parameters of square footage. And I went into each sale, looking at every picture, reading every agent remark, and I selected 4 sales, 3 which I felt were the most similar to the subject property, and 1 that was kind of an outlier, but I put it in for a reason. Okay. So the first home, I want you to remember, we were listed for 680. The first home was a home that sold that was bigger than the subject property and sold for about $600,000 and had a slightly larger lot. And if you look at the condition of the property, it's very similar to the subject property and very, very comparable. Sale number 2, again, this is a very similar square foot home within the 100 square feet of the subject property. It's sold in the same time frame, within 6 months to 12 months, and sold for $575. And 2,500 square foot home on an 11,000 square foot lot. Third home sold for a little bit more, sold for $625. It's a slightly smaller house, 2,400 square feet on a slightly smaller lot. And if you look at the inside, the pictures show that it's very similar in condition as far as upgrades go to the subject property. But what was different about this house, if I remember correctly, the agent remarks stated that it had all new plumbing, all new electrical, new roof, new windows. And in this market area where these homes are built in the 1960s and most homes still have galvanized pipes, those types of upgrades are very, very, they'll bring a higher price point. And that's why this one sold for $625. And then I picked this one. And you're going to have that person, that seller down the street that says, hey, that home down the street that's the same size as mine on the same size lot sold for $705. So I should be worth $705. But clearly, if you look at pictures here, that's not the case. This home is much, much nicer. So it obviously sold at a higher price point because it had been fully updated. And if I remember correctly, I think the listing even said that it over the last 12 months, it had over $200,000 in upgrades. So very, very upgraded house, not nearly comparable, but you get the picture. The next thing we do as appraisers is we put it all, the subject property on the left-hand side as a grid, and then each comparable 1, 2, 3, 4 all together. And this is where we start making adjustments for the differences in bath counts, the differences in garage counts, the differences in pools or quarters. And what's important here, I've done all the work for us. What's important here is these values here on the bottom, right? I've got a range of after adjusted values is what these are called. And that is that comparable property plus or minus the amenities wherever they need to be added or subtracted. You get an after adjusted value. So on this first one, after I made the adjustments for all the differences, I came up to 553. The next one was 543. The next one, 568. And the last one, 555. So as appraisers, we have to support a value, and figuring out the value is what we're trying to do today. My value has to fall within the range of these after adjusted values. And what does that mean? It needs to fall somewhere between 543 and 568. They can't go below and they can't go above. So this property can be worth anywhere in between that. In this case, we might put it in the middle. But that is just a quick analysis of what you're looking for, how you're using data in the market to come up to properties. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to talk about one more thing if I can. We got 3 minutes and then we'll go to questions. This is timed perfectly, Diego.
Yeah, good job.
7:07. I don't know if you guys discuss what gross rent multiplier is in your market. No.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the gross rent multiplier is basically the price of a property divided by its rental income. And let's say a property is worth $100,000 and it's renting for $1,000 a month. You divide $100,000 by 1,000, and that gives you 1%. And if you're analyzing properties, a really, really, really good rule of thumb and is the 1% rule, that your property should rent for 1% of the total value that you're buying it for. Doesn't always work. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's lower. It really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're a buy and hold investor, or you're looking to flip properties or build new construction or Airbnb, it can all be different. But for um, the traditional buy and hold, you're really targeting that 1%. You know, if I'm buying $1 million property, it should rent for 10,000 a month. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's my presentation. And I'd love to take some Q&A.
Yeah, we've got some
This is
questions.
where we really learn.
Yeah, we've got some questions in the hopper. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex's information is here on the shared screen, alex@appraisalmc.com. And his webpage is appraisalmc.com is the webpage. So I've got a question. Let me start off by asking you this, and I'm glad you brought this up, is when you said about the price per square foot cost analysis to also what somebody's willing to pay. It's exactly correct. It's what are people willing to pay? That's how you set, you have the tax appraised value, you have the market appraised value, and then you have the comparable data that reinforces that market appraised value. And I tell people, it doesn't matter if you add additional things to your backyard or put gold, but if people aren't willing to pay more than this and your appraiser has that data, don't over rehab this thing. And that is one thing why when you brought up the HGTV, I had the camera off. I was like doing backflips. I'm going, your appraiser is telling you this, guys. Your appraiser is also agreeing with that. Stick to the data, right?
Yeah.
Members come to us at SVI, Alex, and they work with, let's say, Maria, who's our selections and design director. And then they come to her and say, I think we want to do this, this, and this. The first things out of her mouth are, what do the comps say?
Exactly.
Exactly. Because everybody's looking at the comps. The buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the appraiser, the obviously the management and compliance company is looking at to make sure there's a standard. Why reinvent the wheel? Don't, right? It makes it easier. So I'm really happy you brought that up. And so let's go ahead and go into the Q&A section right now. And I have a gentleman here, Gaston asked, can we get a copy of the slide deck? If so, how can we obtain it?
Well, I think there's some copyright infringement on this slide deck because I pulled some pictures off HAR. Now, I'm not making any money off of this, so I would say that it's okay to share it. I can email it to you guys.
Okay. Or the other thing, guys, this is being recorded. And so Gaston, because it's being recorded, it's going to go on our YouTube channel at StratiVentures and social media. So you'll be able to have that information there. Good question there, Gaston. Lan Lu asked, can you use zip code for search comparable instead of neighborhood? Because some neighborhoods are too big or small.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and you can. But I'll give you an example. I ran an absorption rate analysis on a zip code in Houston 77024 the other day. The problem with that is the value ranges of homes sold in that market range from probably 700,000 to 10 million. So you're going to get very, very large variation of properties. Listen, the goal is trying to find the most similar properties to the subject in the subject's immediate market area. Whether you're doing it by zip code or by subdivision name, it doesn't really matter as long as you're not pulling data from locations that are superior or locations that are inferior. And remember my slide, even within a subdivision, you could have price point variations. So it's it's not a black and white answer, but just be careful.
For example, I live here in Cyprus, and in Cyprus you have Coles Crossing, and then you have Coles Crossing Estates. Guys, Barker Cyprus divides both of them, and there's a big variation of value there, but they're both
Totally.
under the same subdivision.
Yeah.
So great question there, Landlu. Go ahead, Alex.
No, yeah, I was agreeing with you. Yes.
Christina Weaver asks, where do you do appraisals?
Appraisal MCs in 33 states. So we actually have contracted appraisers. We've got 4,500 contracted appraisers across those states. In the tech division is only in Texas, and it covers Houston, Austin, San Antonio markets, but we also have other contracted appraisers across Texas. So we pretty much have all areas covered. I believe our website will show you what states that we're licensed in.
Perfect. And that's appraisalmc.com, guys. Lanlu asked, in some hot market, people overpay asking price due to multiple offers. How does this work?
Yeah. Unfortunately for appraisals, we've got rules and guidelines that are given to us by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, USDA. Those are basically the insurers, and the rules that they give appraisers state that you've got to be able to support your value with historic sales. Now, we all know the definition of market value is a willing buyer and a willing seller. When it comes to financing and appraisals, that's not how we look at it. So we're experiencing that quite often in Houston, Austin, San Antonio, lots of parts of Florida, even parts of California, where people are offering more than the list price, and there's multiple offers. Just because something does not appraise doesn't mean it's not worth it. But when you start going over list price significantly and there are no comparable sales, that's not investing, that's speculating. So be very, very cautious when doing that. I am very, I'm conservative. I look at the past and I'm making decisions based on historic data. And I'm not looking 10 years behind me. I'm looking 4, 5, 6 months behind me. And that gives me a little bit peace of mind when I'm investing or buying a property or flipping a property or buying land, that, hey, this historic data proves that value. If the market continues to overbid over list price, that's a good thing. That means that there's still more and more and more and more demand. So you're probably buying at a good price if you buy with support from historic data. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Okay. I always like to tell people, especially with that particular topic or question, was follow the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And so a lot of your lenders are going to trust what I like to call the third-party non-biased opinion and data of an appraiser, because that's the only data that they have to go with. We've got members that come to us all the time, Alex, and they're like, I found this amazing deal. They're willing to sell it, but my realtor's having problems coming up with a value, a value. I tell them, invest in an appraisal. Get a starting point. Because if you had to pick between realtor comps or an appraisal, your appraiser is probably the most important person of the equation, because that at least gives you a sense of where you need to begin your pricing and negotiations. It also sets a standard barrier to the buyer, to the seller, to know what exactly their property is at. And last but not least, it's an appraisal that your lenders are going to either show or be able to see. But nobody's speculating here, because you guys are governed by not speculating.
That's right, Diego. Let me ask you a question. When it comes to guiding your investors, if you don't know what a property is worth, are you really investing, right? Or are you speculating? I come across deals all the time, but if I can't support it with hard data, there's so many deals out there, just skip it, move on to the next one.
It's about surviving to go to the next one.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah. It's about surviving. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Leanne Chow asked, how do you appraise a property that we can convert to a 5 bedroom to that from 5 bedrooms, 3 baths to 9 bedrooms, 3 baths, basically adding more space, adding more available rooms?
It depends if you're adding square footage or not, and it depends what the property is being used for. You know, if you start using that for student housing in an area that's next to a college, that might be a good investment. But if you're going from 5 bedrooms to 9 bedrooms in Cypress or Katy, which are suburbs of Houston, what really are you adding to the property? How many buyers really need a 9 bedroom house? You know, unless you have a family of 12, which who can afford that these days? That's completely irresponsible, right? I'm
Mhm.
totally kidding. I wish I could afford 12 kids, but you know, your typical, you want to in upgrade the house to what the typical buyer is going to look for. And I don't think in many markets you're going to really attract the typical buyer or more buyers because you have 9 bedrooms versus 5 or 6.
Right.
So that
And
that's all. It's analyzing that particular market.
correct. And also consider the fact that if you're going to use it for, let's say, commercial grade or some type of performance, there is that as is market value, and then there's that performance value. And at that point, you're seeking two different types of appraisals.
That's right.
And we fall into that so many times when somebody's looking at a single family, you know, less than 4 units, and they're wanting to get a commercial grade performance value. No, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have to look at that under the conventional conforming type numbers, and then how much you're willing to pay over, which is money you're bringing to the table. Then look at the performance side, which that's when you're investing, but you're not borrowing excessively. Um,
Yeah. No. What you're saying makes sense to me, and I agree. You know, the way we appraise is it again, it's very conservative and it's based on typical comps in the market. So when you're, let's say you've got a 4 unit property and residential appraisers can appraise up to 4 units, but in your pro forma, you're going to split that into 8 units because it's going to rent for more. You're changing really what the property is, and you've got to analyze it a little bit differently, right?
mhm.
So you have to know what you're doing. Is it right for the market? Is it right for your investment? You know, I may say, no, there are no comps for that, but your rents may show, hey, there's a need for this many units and this price point, and you know, it's a better investment than just renting 4 units. So you've got to analyze that yourself. But if you go beyond 4 units, you're dealing with commercial appraisers and more gross rent multipliers and cap rates at that point.
Yes, and guys, we had some other questions in regards to that topic. So that right there. So I'll mark those off here. Um, the let's say it says the way lender choose a third party company, so we can't choose your company as an appraisal. So I guess they're saying because the lender chooses the appraisal, you as a consumer, can you say, hold on, I want to use my appraisal? How does that?
No, you know, it doesn't work that way. If it's something that's insured for Fannie or Freddie or FHA, it typically goes through the third party management company that's selected. The management company is selected by the lender. So let's say ABC Mortgage uses Appraisal MC for all their procurement of ordering appraisals. All appraisals will be ordered through Appraisal MC. The borrower consumer cannot select the appraiser. There can be no influence. It's part of the firewall and protection and safety of the consumers. So
Correct, correct. And the end of the industry in itself, the market.
yes, gives it
Um,
more credibility.
correct. Roxanne Myers, she's from Ohio, asked, are there any other suggestions for me when trying to determine what my after repaired value is? Is there someone I can turn to, or should I pay for an ARV appraisal, question mark?
Um, First thing that I would invest in is access to your local MLS and figuring out, go take a couple classes at that local MLS on how to use it, because all the information that you need is within that MLS. You just need to figure out how to extract it. So if you're looking at a project and you're looking at this house in Ohio, in Great Fields subdivision, Ohio, if you can figure out how to look for all the sales in the past 6 months in Great Fields subdivision in Ohio, and then look at the photos, look at what homes sold for, you can figure out what a home would sell for after repaired, because you're going to find other homes that have been repaired or upgraded, updated, and sold within that time frame. And then it's your job to analyze. So if you're still having trouble, yes, absolutely, hire an appraiser, talk to a realtor. Appraiser is going to give you the most unbiased opinion. But for me, if I'm not the one analyzing the deal, it doesn't matter how much I pay someone. I still need to be comfortable with it, right? I can have an analyst tell me that Tesla is going to go up. Okay, well, I don't really understand why. So I don't want to buy it. And so you have to understand the why. And the why is going to be you doing the boots on the ground research and search. And that's why this class is here to kind of help you do that.
Correct. And another thing to that is I always bring this up in our Realtor Advantage trainings that we do, since we're training realtors now, guys, to work with investors and investors to work with realtors, because there has to be that uniformity of the risk, and most of all, understanding what each one's direction is. And it's kind of funny where today we were doing one of our trainings, and you ask, 30 realtors, how many of you guys got training on how to pull comps? 21 of them said no. Because it's speculatory, it's opinion based, because a lot of that is not data driven the way an appraiser were to look at that. So what you said just a second ago is, if you have access to the MLS, get training, understand parameters and know what you need to look for. And that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to find one property like yours, it's similar square footage, same subdivision, has the same upgrades that you're going to do. What did it sell for?
Yep, exactly.
There you
So
go.
Gaston asked, do you use comparable features and values based off of MLS, or can you also use private or MLS sales?
We typically utilize sales off MLS because we're able to really more verify the information that way. We do a lot of appraisals for new construction builds that don't go on MLS, but in those scenarios, we always ask for a copy of the contract and options and upgrades that were put into that, because we want to make sure what's inside is similar to what we have. So whatever you can find that supports what's inside the house, what supports the finishes that it has, is okay to use. I just like to use MLS because of the verification. I can call the realtor, the listing agent. There's a million reasons why MLS is better.
I like to tell people that you kind of turn into either an investigator, detective, or an attorney, because what you're doing is all of them, because you're building a case, right?
Right.
You're building a case. Rick Bressler, who happens to be the owner of Katie Capital Investments. I don't know, Alex, if you've ever worked with Rick Bressler. Phenomenal individual, actually one of our favorite PML outfits to work with. He goes, if you don't have enough recent comp sales, less than 6 months, will you appreciate the sold price for older comps? Appreciate the sold price for older comps? If so, what appreciation rate would you use?
Yes. So that's what's called time adjustments, and that's an hour-long discussion in itself.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's such a good question, because there are times where you just don't have any comps. You don't have any comps that are recent. You don't have any comps that are similar. What do you do? There's a million tricks that we use as appraisers. What we're really trying to find is what's the best way to support that. And it's hard to make time adjustments when there's a 6-month window where nothing is sold, because you have no proof that the market's increased in those 6 months, because you have nothing that's sold. So I don't know how to answer it in that particular case. because the time adjustments we make as appraisers are specific to that market, that subdivision, not the entire city. You know, when they tell you Houston's increased 12%, well,
Yeah,
some markets increased 30%, and some markets increased 1%. So
right.
it's very micro
And
specific.
you just said something, you go, you guys have tricks, you have nuances, things that you learn from experience, and most of all, that as an appraiser you guys can use. Ladies and gentlemen, what Alex was saying is don't try new tricks.
Don't try.
Refer back to your appraiser. That's why they exist. Norma Valdez said, "How do you appraise a property that has no comps, no houses have been sold, nearest comparable neighborhood is 2 miles, and was custom made. The largest is 3,800 in the neighborhood, and the house in question is 4,800 square feet, with possible 1,200 more when the attic is converted to the third floor."
Oh my goodness. All right, let's talk about, listen, this is classic case of an over improvement, right? And over improved properties, if you, gosh, Diego, you probably have run into this with your investors. They've got the biggest, baddest ass house in the neighborhood. And guess what? Those are the ones that get penalized the most. You
Yes.
don't want that. There's nothing to support the value. It's, it's a duck amongst swans, and it just doesn't conform to the neighborhood. So if you can't really find comparables to your property, like I said in the presentation, stay away. That's
Yeah.
not what you're here to do. You're not here to speculate. You're not here to just guess at a price per square foot. And just because that house is 2,000 square feet bigger than any other house, it should be worth more. Well, guess what? Someone may not want to pay more for that house because it's in that neighborhood. So you have to be careful with what you do. You could go a million ways in trying to value that property. I would probably use sales from the subject subdivision, sales from competing subdivisions, and then determine if those competing subdivisions are similar price point. So if I pick a comp from my neighborhood that's 3,800 square feet and it's sold for 400 grand, did that other neighborhood have the same price point for that square footage? And if so, then okay, we've got proof that this is probably a similar neighborhood. In that neighborhood, they did have a 6,000 square foot home that sold. So maybe we can use that as a comparable. It is a long shot. I would not take that risk,
You
but
know,
it can happen.
it can, and it reminds me of, we're constantly seeing new investors that come to want to know about SVI, and a lot of times we look at cases that they're actively in or that they're looking to get. So we want to prove our methods with them by helping them out. It specifically reminds me of one gentleman that has had this exact issue, and he said, "Well, I think I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing." And then he called me like 6 months. No, sorry, he called me 6 weeks later and said, "Oh, my house sold. It was the biggest one. It was on the corner." And I was like, "Oh, great. Tell me who sold it." It was a gentleman from California having to put a 1031 exchange into play. And he was obviously running from the taxes, if you know what I mean, because, and I said, "You got lucky."
That's all
So,
it
so,
is.
so don't
Yeah.
get excited. You happen to find the right buyer from the right place who had the right need and needed to put capital in. You got lucky, because we were telling him you are literally about 50, 60,000 above where you need to be. And so guys,
Look,
you can't
yeah,
always
exactly.
get lucky.
Exactly, Dave. It happens. But again, you want to be an investor, not a speculator, right? And
Correct.
I think that's what you guys are teaching there. So,
Correct. Rick Bressler asked for a 1007 rent comp in the area where there are very few, if any, long-term rentals, because most everything are short-term rentals, coastal communities. What do you do?
yeah, we're running into this more and more as more and more people are gobbling up properties to rent out on Airbnb. And the way we analyze properties for rental is based on long-term rents. So right now we're just going historically back in time as far as we need to until we find historic long-term rents, because that's the only way Fannie and Freddie will insure it. And I understand that, you go to Galveston right now and everyone that's bought an Airbnb they've been making great money over the past 2 years in this pandemic, but I'm already hearing rumors that bookings are down 30-40%, whether
Right.
that's because of recession or because the world is opening up and people are traveling more. No one knows. So short-term rental is not a way to analyze a property, especially looking back over the last 2 years, which is probably going to be the biggest. um, I may be wrong, but it might be the biggest window where Airbnbs were rented the most.
Right. And we've actually heard from some people that we know in the short-term space, specifically through Airbnb, is that their direct competitor of why it's been slowing down is that these hotels, they can make their adjustments. They can
Yeah.
adjust their prices. So when somebody's paying for an Airbnb 250 a night, and then you can go stay at a DoubleTree for 160. Do you see what I mean? People are now going back into the standard hotel, and some of these hotels are offering more incentives.
Or I think another way to look at it is the saturation of a market. Galveston is a perfect example of it. There have been tons of speculators buying in there for Airbnb. So now you've got too many Airbnbs.
Mhm.
And it's a classic case of a cycle. You've got this boom, speculative boom. It gets oversupplied, and then prices will come back down to reality, and then the cycle will start all over again.
I've always thought that if you have an Airbnb, you should have kind of a complimentary wine list.
Love it.
It should, it should draw more people. Ralph Dyson asked here, when is the best time to engage an appraiser for doing a flip off market cash only? And what is the average cost for an appraisal? Ralph, that's a great question.
Yeah, I would start from the beginning as long as you've got your repair bid and what you're going to be doing to it. So it's really interesting that we can value a property based on its future value, technically not future value, but based on the repairs already having been done, even though they haven't been done. It's the after repair value. So you're giving us a repair bid. I'm basing my comps off that repair bid. So as soon as you've got the repair bid and the property, that's when you can order an appraisal. It's going to cost you roughly plus or minus $500.
Okay. For those of you that are also looking to do new construction, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, we use, for example, ISB Capital as a construction lender, in which I know you do appraisals for them,
Right.
is they're going to want to see what we're putting in, the material takeoffs, plans, and everything, because you're going to give a pre-construction appraisal value, which then tells you, should we, it's the funniest thing is we do that ahead of time to know what our land allowance is going to be, because a lot of people buy the land thinking it's inexpensive. And then you go through the numbers and the pre-construction values, and you're like, even if they gave us the dirt, it would not work. And
Yeah.
so you really don't want to fall into that.
Yeah.
Dale Myers here asked, hi, Diego and Alex. By the way, Dale is a cool guy. He's Roxanne Myers' son. Dale, need to see you back in, man. Should I pay for an ARV appraisal on a BRRRR before I complete the BRRRR? I thought I bought it off market, and I'm trying to decide to sell it or to BRRRR it.
Um, I don't know if I have the best advice, but if you're going to get an appraisal and you're analyzing for that function, it's what is it, flip or hold? Is that the question?
Right. He's either determining, because he says, I've heard if I get an off-market ARV appraisal, it will appraise lower than a sale when I get an offer that is high.
I don't know if that's right, but this is basically two appraisals on how to analyze this, right?
Yeah.
It's after repair value appraisal, and then as is condition, what it will rent for an as is condition. So yeah, it's difficult. It's just, this is back to understanding MLS and running the analysis yourself. And what I would do in that situation is, let's say I've got what upgrades I want to do to the house. What is it going to sell for based on the comps that I can find in MLS? And then in MLS also, you can find what homes are renting for. So then you run that analysis. Okay, they're going to rent for $2,000 a month, and my monthly note's only $1,300 a month. So then you determine, Do I want 700 bucks in cash flow, or do I want to make 20 grand on this flip that's going to take 3 months?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah,
It depends
it's a
on the
numbers game.
investor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. So ladies and gentlemen, Alex's information is here for Appraisal MC. There's his phone number, there's his email, and that's the webpage. Alex, did you want to give any closing comments, any type of recommendations, something of feedback so people can
No,
get to...
real quick, I appreciate it. I think we were able to keep all the participants for more than the whole hour. So I hope I gave you guys very good, valuable information. Analyzing investment properties is very difficult to do. You know, I've been appraising for over 20 years, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of research to figure out what is the right upgrade to put in a house, what is the right house to build on a lot. And all that information can be found by looking at historic data and then applying that data to your project. So again, I would play around with MLS, see how you could figure out a way to analyze these properties yourselves, and then ask questions. Don't, yeah, a lot of these realtors, and Diego, you said it best, like they don't have the best training. You know,
Right.
if you really, really look at what a realtor does, what do? They're just experts at marketing a property, not necessarily pricing a property.
Correct. That's volatile.
So I think it's really up to you, and I think you need to use better resources, and that is maybe the value of a well-seasoned appraiser. There are a lot of new appraisers that may fall into the same bucket as a new realtor, but there's going to be that seasoned appraiser in your market, like myself in Houston, or some of my appraisers that have been doing this for a decade or longer, or someone in Ohio that is reputable and has a firm that's been doing it for 15 years. Lean on them. Like hold them, you know, give them a retainer for consulting. I have people hire me to consult them on their projects. They'll throw me land. What should I build here? I want to build 3 units. Well, 2 units is going to gross you more income. And they'll look at it and they're like, you're right. How did you figure that out? Well, that's my job.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. And so one last question here. What is the, I love this one from Christina Weaver. What is the approximate fee for an appraisal to know? What is the approximate fee to know for an appraisal so I'm not being ripped off?
Like I said, it's plus or minus 500 bucks. And again, you want to pay an appraiser fairly for their time, and you want a good one. That's what's the most important, is which appraiser is good, which appraiser knows this market. Appraisers that are investors themselves, that flip properties, that have rentals, those are going to be even better. I have rentals, I flip properties, I've flipped land, I've flipped new construction, or I've built new construction. So you need to find appraisers in your market that can do that for you. So
perfect. And Paul, you asked this question: how does an investor get access to the MLS? Well, there's a lot of different ways. I would say give us a call. We'd be happy to walk you through that process and working with a reputable realtor that can help you gain access. So I want to thank all of our SVI partners and affiliates, Appraisals MC, for your time there, Alex. And for those of you that are wanting to get more information about StratiVentures, feel free to go to investorrealestatetraining.com. We have our one-on-ones that you can register for. There's also a great ebook that I wrote that happens to be about mitigating risk. There's a lot of great information. And then also you can follow us on social media through YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and also come check us out at StratiVentures.com. You can also scan the code that's right there, but also know that this is done for you guys. And I was happy to see a good response of people asking questions, Alex. That means appraisals are very important in the world of investing, and we could not have had a better representative talking about that. So again, here's Alex's information, and we look forward to working with everybody and seeing you guys next week. Oh, not next week, but the Monday after that. You can go to our landing page, investorrealestatetraining.com, click the events button, and you're going to see what the topic of the next webinar that we've got. Alex, thank you so much, my friend, and enjoy your family, because if not, why are we doing this, right?
that's 100% right. Thank you, Diego.
Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you.